Will Netflix's move to kill account sharing cost it customers?
And who's winning the smart speaker smackdown? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as always by Alex Kibben. Now, Alex, Tesla CEO Elon Musk declared himself Tesla's techno king this week. So, which of us should be the techno king at Vertical Hold?
Look, I'm thinking seriously that it should be you. I feel that I fit more naturally into that kind of grand vizier who is eventually going to poison your food kind of role.
Yeah, I can see that. I can totally see that. I mean, I was going to Rochambeau you for it, but I can see that working
I'm
out.
willing to cede the throne to you, my liege.
Speaking of magnanimous rulers, this week we're joined by a longtime friend of the show and News Corp's tech leader supreme, Jen Dudley Nicholson. Jen, what's your title of choice over there?
Look, as long as you're my minions, I don't care what you call me.
True, because tech leader supreme does sound like a pizza.
Yeah, actually, I probably come with capsicum. I'm not really comfortable with this.
So, speaking of things that people just aren't comfortable with, there's a whole lot going on with smart speakers and smart displays this week. Sonos has unveiled a new speaker, Google's unveiled a new screen, and Apple sent the original HomePod to live on the farm. But before we dive into the smart speaker smackdown, Netflix seems to be declaring war on account sharing. Alex, what's the story here?
So, for the longest time, you've been able to do what you, Adam, actually have referred to previously on this show as the brother-in-law principle. This idea that you sign up for a streaming service, some kind of subscription service that allows you multiple streams. You share your account details with someone else. You both get access to the service and you split the cost, or one of you just carries the cost, but you both still get to enjoy your content. Now, it's always been a breach of the terms and conditions of pretty much any service that's offered this. But by and large, there's been a bit of blind eye turning. It has been raised with Netflix in years gone by, and they've kind of said, look, we know it happens, but it's kind of tricky to police, and we're more keen on growth, so we're not really going to punish people for it. But you really shouldn't, naughty people. However, in the last week, overseas at least, people have been reporting that when they've logged into what ostensibly seem to be shared accounts, they've been being told, hey, are you sure you're the account holder? We think you should verify via email or SMS. So they're definitely starting to crack down on this. Jen, do you think that kind of pester power thing is an effective tactic for Netflix to use?
I think that they must be losing so much money as a result of this, because everybody knows somebody who's kind of piggybacking on somebody else's Netflix account. This does not surprise me at all. I mean, it surprises me that they're finally taking action against it, because we've heard about this for so long and they've been talking about it and threatening to do this for so long. It's nice of them not to do that during the height of the pandemic. However, for Americans, it's very real, this whole like stay home order business. So it does feel like a little bit mean.
I think, though, that not everybody who's sharing an account would have paid for one. Like, for example, I've got my mother and my mother-in-law on my account, and I know that neither of them would actually go out and pay for it if I cancelled it. I don't have so much of a problem with that. I think you more, and that's easy. If you send them a code, if you send me a code, I just send them the code. I think it's more when you're sharing it with your friends who really could afford it. Like, I don't actually share accounts with my brother-in-laws because they can afford to get it themselves, and they've got little kids, they'll get the value out of it. It's my parents that I share it with and my mother-in-law, because otherwise they wouldn't use it. And particularly during lockdown, I think they got a bit of value out of it, but there's no way they would turn around and pay for it if I said I'm closing my account.
I think this could sort of lead to a lot of awkward conversations between couples who've broken up, because often when a couple breaks up, somebody takes the Netflix password with them and the other person doesn't necessarily realize this for a period of time. I think if you do get that prompt and it's an ex and, Netflix wants you to verify something, you may not actually do that. So in that way, I think that Netflix could do very well out of the breakup market.
There was a story doing the rounds, quite possibly apocryphal, of a breakup couple where one half of the couple changed their username to settings and their icon to a cog so that they wouldn't get spotted, which is next level devious in this sense. But Adam, on your point of kind of sharing with your parents, but they never would have paid, I've got to say, I'm not super comfortable with that. And I'm not having a go at you specifically, but I'm not super comfortable with the kind of entitlement thing that you get into when you kind of say, oh, well, it's okay to do it because they never would have paid for it. If they never would have paid for it, then, especially considering we work as content creators, I think there's some slippery slope there. I do know what you mean, but it doesn't always sit all that well with me. The other thought that occurs to me around this, though, is obviously some people will just go, oh, that's fine. I'll just get my brother-in-law or whoever to text me the message. Others will go, it's too hard, I will pay Netflix. But how are they going to manage this when, and this might be sometime in the future, when we can travel again and we're going to be logging in from strange countries, strange IP addresses, legitimately on accounts that we're allowed to use?
Yeah, look, I think that's incredibly frustrating. However, it's probably a very long time away as well that we have to kind of plan for this. I have been in circumstances where I haven't been able to use two-factor authentication overseas because of various ways that I tried to get around having to pay for my mobile phone overseas. So I can see that would be a drama. But I mean, potentially for Netflix, the upsides are better than the downsides here, and maybe they'll get more exes on board than they will sort of parents-in-law and travelers.
I'm assuming that Netflix can put some smarts on the back end to detect that, okay, this guy almost always uses it from the same IP address in Melbourne. Now, for some reason, he's using it in LA. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he lives in Melbourne and he's traveled to LA, whether as opposed to this one person always uses it in Sydney, even though everyone else in the account uses it on the same IP address in Melbourne. So this shifty bastard using it in Sydney probably shouldn't be using it. They should be able to do some kind of basic analytics like that to sort of pick up. If it's an anomaly, I think they should just let it slide.
My experience with algorithms has not been that positive, though.
You have more confidence than the rest of us, Adam, on this
if
one.
If you've ever seen eBay recommendations, then you know, yeah.
So yeah, good luck with that, Chief.
Jen, Netflix, of course, also has a lot of competition, most notably Disney Plus, whose subscriber numbers are just rocketing up recently. There's some analysis that suggests that if you added everything they've got together, they might even be bigger than Netflix now globally. How much of a gift is this to Disney, or is this the model that Disney will follow if Netflix gets away with it?
I think the last bit. I think that this is an ongoing problem for the industry around sort of trying to evade paying for stuff. And as you say, we're all content creators. It's nice to be able to pay for things out in the real world and get paid for what you do. So I think if it works for Netflix, it'll probably work for Disney, and it might work for Stan, and we'll see a lot more of this. Because, I mean, as you pointed out at the start, it is kind of against the rules and has always been against the rules.
But, geo dodging, sneaking in from Australia was also against the rules, but they never cared for a very long time until suddenly they actually had a way to check.
Geo blocking.
I think there is a big difference there, though, Adam, because I mean, it's still a break of the rules, don't get me wrong, but it feels different to me if I'm paying Netflix for a service and I'm just geo-dodging to get into the service. Yes, I'm breaking the rules, but I'm only paying for, that single stream or for me to be in this one place, as opposed to the vertical hold Netflix theoretical account. It doesn't exist before Netflix gets twitchy, that you and I could share together.
Yes. But the argument could be made that if I'm getting into Netflix to watch a show that I should be paying for Foxtel here to watch, then I'm stealing from Foxtel by sneaking into Netflix and paying them less to watch it there.
But you're still paying for it, I think, is the underlying theme.
Absolutely.
And
That's the way I
again,
look at
like,
it.
I mean, the geo block thing goes back to, the DVD days and Blu-ray days when, you'd get a disc and it would be useless, and, you paid $10 less for it and thought you were doing a good thing. I have less of a problem with that, because you are still ultimately trying to pay for content, whereas maybe, the mother-in-laws and exes of the world, maybe they just need to pay some money for some stuff.
So the world of smart speakers is one that's usually kind of a bit slow. Models get released and then nothing happens for ages. Slightly updated models get released. But the past couple of weeks have seen some really big movements from some of the big industry players. Let's start out with Google. Jen, what's Google serving up to us now?
Well, Google, in a style that only Google could really do, is releasing a speaker where they've kind of taken advice on one hand and they've taken the camera out of it, but also making it just on the border of creepy, which is really just kind of a Google patented thing that they like to do. So they're bringing out the second generation of their Google Nest Hub. I can't really keep up with all of the various names, but apparently my phone can, which now wants to talk to me. So this device is the thing that's most interesting about it. Yes, it's a smart speaker. It's got a screen on it, all those things you'd expect. It's actually not that expensive too, $149. But the interesting thing is that it uses something that is a low range radar, as I understand it, called Soli, to track your sleep. And it can track your movements during your sleep. This thing is like Santa Claus. It knows when you're sleeping and when you're awake, when you're coughing, when you're snoring. It takes recordings of it. But don't worry, kids, it only processes that on the device. Again,
Google promises.
Exactly. Right on the border of creepy. Yes, your devices are watching you. Apparently,
Google
you're
is
okay with
watching
that.
you sleep, children.
It's listening to me right now, so I'm too afraid to say the name again. But don't worry, everybody. It's all on the device. You're going to be fine. And also, you might have sleep apnea.
So I can understand why they got rid of the camera, because they want to encourage people to put it on their bedside table, and having the camera in the old one would have been a deal breaker there. But then to do
the
this,
old one, hang on, sorry, just to interrupt. The old one never had a camera. The big one, the Max,
The big one does have a camera.
Has
Oh,
had
the
a
old one
camera.
doesn't have a camera.
The little one
Right.
never had a camera for this exact reason. I mean, Google's position on this was that the Nest display, it was the Google Home Hub originally.
Yeah.
That a lot of people have them on their bedsides because they don't have a camera.
Oh, all right. Yeah, sorry, I got mixed up there. But I think that this thing with the 7-inch screen is too big to have on your bedside table. I've got a Lenovo smart clock, which is basically a third-party Google speaker, and it's got a 4-inch screen, and it is perfect as an alarm clock, and it dims its screen very nicely, and it does all the kind of bedside clock things that you'd want. I just don't think your average person necessarily wants something 7 inches like that big on the bedside table. It does start to feel like a small television that is watching you.
There's some things to say in regards to this, but I'm not going to say
as
that.
I was saying it,
I'm not going to be that
sure
person.
if people want 7
This
inches
is
in the
a family
bedroom.
podcast,
and I'm
people.
like,
Family podcast. Let us
Back
remember
it
that.
up.
Just to bring us
Back it
back on
up.
track. So I actually do have a Google Nest beside the bed. Oh my gosh, it's listening to me again. Stop it. And it is really useful. And yes, the clock is potentially too big, but at the same time, you can read the weather on it. You can see forecasts on it. You can add sort of things to your shopping list when you think of it. It's quite good at, showing off photos if you want to do that and be kind of old school with a digital photo frame. I find it very useful for broadcasting wake up, so that I can actually send this to different bedrooms and have people have to wake up and come downstairs. And those sorts of things. So it is useful. It's just the sleep tracking thing that is going to be really interesting. And also, in launching this, Google has left open the possibility that they may charge for it in future as well. So you could maybe have to pay Google to be slightly creepy in the bedroom.
See, I wonder, and I don't know for sure, but I wonder if this isn't one of those things, a bit like, oh, my phone's got a camera in it, but that's really creepy, that in a relatively short span of time, we might just go, oh, well, actually, that's really useful. I mean, I think that the underlying technology is incredibly interesting, because this is the solid camera stuff that they had in like the Pixel 4, for example, for those motion gestures that never worked terribly well. And instead, they're adapting it to say, well, we've run a heck of a lot of machine learning tests to work out what sleep looks like in humans. So now we can work out what sleep looks like in you. I think, at a technical level, it's fascinating. I wonder if it's one of those things that might not just become kind of socially acceptable. I mean, if you sleep with a sleep tracking band on, you're already letting something watch you. It's just not watching you, it's tracking you.
It is interesting too, because at the same time we've got Google taking over Fitbit, and there's all sorts of ACCC sort of investigations into that and what they can do with all of this massive amount of information that Fitbit has. A lot of it sleep information. So potentially, with this combined with the Fitbit stuff, it could be, they could have an absolute massive database of information that could prove useful to, people at the end of it. And it could also prove that you get sent a bunch of ads for sleep apnea devices and weird masks and bedding in your future. Who knows?
But also they know when you're at your weakest. They can see when you haven't had enough sleep, and they hit you with that thing and you go, oh, yeah, all right. You give in and you buy one, or they hit you with coffee or whatever.
That is all the time.
Yeah,
So
it'll be, caffeinated gummy bears 24/7.
That's okay. I'm fine with that.
As the Grand Vizier of Vertical Hold, clearly I should be interested in this technology. But the other bit of technology in the new Nest Hub, which I do want to just touch on briefly, is that I think it's the second smart device we've seen, or smart hub device we've seen, that's Thread compatible for the new Thread protocol standard. And that's an interesting bit of tech as well.
I know a little bit about Thread. I haven't followed it as much because it seems to me that, like, you heard a lot about Bluetooth and Zigbee and some of these other short range things, and then they started to show up in devices and you kind of understood it. Thread is one of those things that I keep hearing mentioned at conferences and stuff like that, but I've never really seen much come of it. How many things are actually using it? Or is it one of those, we've got it there because one day we'll do something with it?
Sort of, but the big thing with Thread is that it's quite open and there's so many different companies signed up for it. So, I mean, right now it's basically this new Google Nest, that smaller Apple HomePod, the HomePod Mini does it, and there's only a handful of actual controllable devices. I think some of the Nanoleaf lights, for example, are Thread compatible.
Yeah.
And it's, but it's really, really low energy, so it's a lot more efficient. I think it's something like 250 devices in a network. And as soon as you start building out a smart home, and I've done this myself, people, the number of devices you have in it, you suddenly realize, wow, that's a lot of things that have to talk to each other. This is a really efficient sort of mesh-based protocol for doing it. So there's a lot of potential in Thread, but you're right, Adam. It is one of those, it's here in this so that other things will work with it. And it is, I guess, in a way, a wait-and-see prospect, but it seems to have better prospects than a lot of the other competing technologies because of some of its underlying technical advantages.
I'm really surprised that Apple's put it in the Home Mini, because Apple does not play well with others. It's always, iWay or the highway. I'm surprised that they would be open to joining a third-party ecosystem like that.
I don't think they've got the choice. I think it's honestly the matter that they are so effectively far behind in smart home stuff. And it's not that HomeKit doesn't work. It's not that it's not a functional system and there aren't devices that work with it. But you compare it to Google, and you especially compare it to Amazon, who are just so dominant in the States. They're starting to talk about it. They're starting to move into it. Therefore, Apple kind of goes, all right, we've got to be along for the ride. Even though, yes, in a very Apple way, we probably wouldn't like to be. Which I suppose brings us on, in fact, to the Apple bit of smart speaker news of the week, which is not to do with the little and still quite excellent HomePod Mini, but no, it's going to sound all kinds of wrong if I call it the HomePod Maxi. The OG HomePod, the big one. Jen, what's going on with the OG HomePod?
Not a lot, sadly. So I actually quite like the OG HomePod, the HomePod Maxi, whatever you want to call it, the giant lunk of audio stuff that Apple put out years ago. Unfortunately, Apple has decided to retire it. So apparently it's too old for this stuff and it's got to go. And it's an interesting one. Like they kind of, they have announced this. It's still on sale. You can still purchase this. And I mean, it's a bit sad because it's an awful lot of technology. I remember at its launch, I actually went to see some of the audio studio where they kind of, put these things together. It's a device that's got quite a lot of power to it, a lot of bass to it. Maybe wasn't as smart as you'd expect of a smart speaker. And I think over time, it has not necessarily become smarter. So unlike, some of these other devices where, as you say, you're getting thread added and you're getting all of these other weird radar technologies and sort of screens and stuff, the HomePod Maxi has just kind of stayed the big lunk on your desk and has great spatial sound, but that's what it does. It's really purely for music, and it didn't evolve much beyond that.
But that's Apple's fault that it's not that smart, because they just didn't let Siri do enough on the HomePod. But I would assume that those same limitations apply to the HomePod Mini. Can you ask a HomePod Mini questions, and can it integrate with things that the normal one can't?
The price is the big difference
Yeah.
there. Apple has a really interesting time with this because they're so focused on privacy. So whereas Google, not so much, to be honest, and like to hoover, although they're getting better, they do like to hoover up as much data as they possibly can and add it to your profile and store all of that information so they can serve you ads. Apple is very much about, when you sign up to one of these smart speakers, it actually assigns you a random number. It makes sure that that's not attached to your iCloud account, all of these sorts of nice things. But as a result, sometimes it's really difficult to kind of access your own information on the speaker that's sitting inside your house, which is potentially frustrating for people, even though it's protecting your privacy. And so those trade-offs don't necessarily sort of make a great difference in this smart speaker space. And obviously it's not a problem with Amazon as well, because they're another business who really likes to sell you stuff. The big difference, of course, with the HomePods, big and small, mini, maxi, whatever you want to call them, is the price, though, because you're talking about something that's right in that sweet spot for sort of purchasing something on a whim and trying it out, and something that will set you back, $450. And back at the beginning was $500. So is a real commitment to the cause straight up.
And it's a very Apple-y product as well, because you can't, plug external things into it. You couldn't for the longest time particularly use it with anything but itself and with Apple Music. So it had some very specific Apple limitations to it. But I find it really interesting because usually with this stuff, Apple just kind of quietly lets it, wander off to the farm, as it were, find its own way there. They'll still be selling it. It'll still be there until suddenly it's not, but they don't even really comment on that or anything along those lines. Whereas with this, they've very much, I think, made that deliberate push to say, hey, you, go out and buy the Mini, please.
It is a really interesting strategy, and I'd be interested to know how many minis they've sold, because I thought they were going to go absolutely gangbusters at Christmas, given that they're right kind of in that sweet spot, as I say, for gifting and those sorts of things. I don't know how many people will run out to buy the last of the Maxis, but you can, if you have two Maxis, you can link them together and you can really annoy your neighbors. I don't know why they didn't make that sort of a bigger deal.
It's interesting, though, that Google's top of the line smart speaker, the Google Home Max, this is a very Max thing happening here. Now, this thing, like, it runs circles around the HomePod. The HomePod is basically the equivalent of a Sonos Play 1, maybe if you want to be generous, close to a Sonos Play 3, where the Google Home Max was basically like, if I was Sonos, I would have called in the lawyers about how close it was to the Sonos Play 5 is the big one. Yes. And this thing, like a Play 5, was like $600 or $700 and sounded absolutely amazing. But they've decided to stop selling them in favor of the $100, $200 Nest Google
Audio.
Nest Audio. Yeah,
Yeah.
they keep changing the bloody names on them, which I think that one is actually the best bang for your buck you can get in terms of if you want a speaker to sit on the kitchen bench. But so Google made the same decision that Apple did, is that, yeah, this is one hell of a speaker, but I think we've maybe gone a little bit too high. I don't know if it's people don't want to spend that kind of money, or people don't care about quality, or if people do care about quality and want to spend that money, they'd rather go into something like the Sonos ecosystem. What do you think, Jen?
I think people are cheap ultimately, and maybe this is kind of a reflection of that. And also, if you're going to try this out for the first time and you're just getting started with smart speakers, you're obviously going to go cheap to start with. And so that's, maybe you'll get, seeded one of those Google devices that comes along with another purchase, the little puck versions. I think that, basically Apple has a version of the puck now. I think those are always going to be more popular, especially because you can put them in more rooms too. When you're talking about, having a destination for your music, then potentially you're buying something much bigger and you're expecting to spend a lot more money. But you don't necessarily want it to be listening to your conversations all the time.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Google sort of did the Apple thing. You're right, Adam. They have stopped selling the Macs, but they just kind of quietly let the stock run out. They didn't really say anything. It just wasn't there one day. I wonder though as well, because those devices and the higher end devices, with one exception, which we'll get to in a minute, I think, very much sit at a price point where your audiophiles start coming in and say, well, actually, what we want is proper stereo separation. We want proper speakers. We want multiple towers. Those are folks who are willing to spend thousands of dollars, not just hundreds of them. So maybe those higher priced speakers just sat in an uncomfortable space. Now, the exception to this, of course, is, and Adam, you've already name dropped them, Sonos. And they've got a new product as well, just to make our speaker smackdown that bit more complex. Jen, what's the story there?
So they've kind of gone cheap. I mean, the Sonos version of cheap, which is still under that $300 mark, and they've gone portable for the first time because, I mean, a lot of these, somewhat portable devices that they've brought out, they're smaller, but a lot of them still require a plug. So this one is called the Roam for a very good reason. You can potentially walk around with this. It actually reminds me a hell of a lot of the bass boost kind of JBL speakers that
the
you
UE
take beside the
booms.
pool. Yeah, absolutely, and get promoted in summer and those sorts of things. And I mean, it's interesting. It's water resistant. I think they said waterproof even. You can apparently play this for 10 hours at a time. And it's a Sonos, so you can link it in with the rest of your system. I think people are going to be quite excited about this prospect.
Well, they did already have a portable speaker. I mean, from where I'm sitting, I could pick up the Sonos Move.
Definition of portable.
But I would pick it up. I wouldn't actually keep picking it up for that long because it was a hefty
It needed
thing.
to come with its own Sherpa. It really did.
It was not something you were going to put in your backpack unless you were very committed.
But the sound out of that thing was absolutely incredible. And I'm keen to see how much sound they have to sacrifice to get down to the Roam. It doesn't have as many drivers in it. It's not just the size of the speakers, it's the number of the speakers in it as well. But being Sonos, they do not want to go cheap and nasty. They won't go like down to that puck style because they just know that that's not their market. So I will be very keen to actually get my hands on one, like I've had the briefing, but to get my hands on one and listen to it and see how good a sound it can actually pump out at that size and that price range.
Because that is the risk for them. Like they're very much a brand that's focused on audio. And, people who are buying into the Sonos range do so because of the quality. And so they have to be careful while they're putting out a cheaper, not a cheap, but a cheaper device, that it doesn't sound cheap.
It's also got this new, slightly weird feature, and maybe the two of you are more keen on it than I am. This thing called Sound Swap. The idea that you walk into the house and you've got your tunes playing on your shoulder because we're back in the 80s now for some reason, or at least in my head, but you've got another Sonos system because let's face it, people who tend to buy into the Sonos system tend to buy a lot of Sonos stuff, and that does make sense. It's an ecosystem in itself. But you've got your other Sonos gear, and you can throw you can throw the audio from that you're playing on the Roam to a Sonos Arc or a Sonos Player or whatever. Basically by kind of physically placing on the device, I think it is. That feels to me like it's just a kind of party trick thing. It's hey, look, this is what you can do. Not something that you're really going to do all the time. Am I missing something?
No. It's the sort of extra accessory, sort of extra feature that we saw often with Samsung, where they'd release a phone that did a billion things. And I think from memory, I think it was around the S4 time. Like there was one where you could actually share music by tapping phones against one another. Nobody did it. No, not even people within Samsung did it. Like it's one of those things that it sounds great when you're talking about it in a boardroom, and later you just go, yeah, no, it's fine. If I want to play music, I'll just ask for the music to play. It's not exactly onerous. You don't have to go through your giant CD collection anymore and find that perfect thing and alphabetize everything. Like you just have to say it. I don't think we necessarily need to be making the speakers kiss.
I'm going to disagree with you there.
Okay.
I'm not sure
You just want to see the speakers kiss, don't you,
I
Adam?
do want to see the speakers kiss, yes. But I thought sound swap was like face swap. Like I want to see Weird Al's face on Prince, that kind of sound swap.
This is a different boardroom feature. This is a different
yes, it is
feature,
a
and I
different
like
boardroom
it.
feature. It could almost be a different podcast. Spotify, I love it and it drives me mad at the same time, right? One of the things I like about Spotify is that I can be using it. I can talk to Google or whatever and get it to play Spotify, and it's not as good as talking to Spotify as it is to its own service. And sometimes you have to really, I get cross with it. But once it does what it's supposed to do, that's great because I've now got the music I want from Spotify coming out of a speaker in the corner of the room. But often it might not be an album or it might be a playlist, or I've given it one song and then it's generated its own playlist. And that's what happened today. I asked for Living in the 70s by Skyhooks. And it was I got this fantastic playlist going with all this 70s and 80s rock. And then I went because that was upstairs. I was in the bedroom. And then I went downstairs and I thought, right, I want to keep this music going. So I tried to do the, hey, will you move the speaker to this music to the other thing? No, it wouldn't work. Because I was trying to move it from a Sonos and not a Google speaker. But that's okay because Spotify comes to the rescue, because what you do is you get the Spotify app out on your phone and it says, oh, you're listening to music on another device. Do you want to bring it here? And you say, yes. And so now I've got Living in the 70s playing on my phone. And then I say, okay, now I want to send it to that speaker over there. Except it didn't bloody work. And I spent 10 minutes fighting with this piece of junk and in the end had to give up. And there was no way to get this magic playlist back except for maybe ask for Living in the 70s again and then hoped that it sort of went down the same track. If there had been an easier way to just tap my phone and know that would work, that would be fantastic. I'm not sure if it's as important with the Move, but on a phone, I really like that idea of moving from one part of the house to the other and being able to reliably throw the sound around.
But you can sort of already do that with the Sonos app, and I think this is where sound swap feels kind of like pointless tech to me. Sonos already does that kind of multi-room stuff. It talks
and it's
to
more
just
reliable than what I just talked about.
To just about every music source on the planet to do it. So if you've got something playing, it's pretty trivial to do it, and you do it on your phone, and it tends to just work. Which, although the other thing you could, of course, do is try the speech thing. And one of the interesting things for the Roam is it's one of the only. Well, once it launches here, I think it'll be one of the only Bluetooth speakers that we've seen which has your choice of two smart assistants on it. I can't think of another one that we've seen here locally, correct me if I'm wrong, that gives you the choice to do the big G. I won't say it in case it sets Jen's phone off again.
Thank you.
Or Amazon's assistant, which I also won't name. Which I think is interesting, although my own experiences with the big G on Sonos haven't always been all that smooth either.
No. And they're getting better at that, though. For a long time, their big G integration was a long way behind. And I was talking to them about that last week, and I said, I've noticed you're actually catching up. And they said, yes, we have been catching up, that the GG features on a Sonos are now closer to the GG speakers on a GG speaker.
GG.
Yes, that's what we call her in my house, GG.
I like it.
You've got to be so careful. They're watching you sleep and they're listening to you all the time, and we pay them money for this.
Sure, and they know exactly what Adam likes to hear, and then they won't play it, which is hilarious.
Yes.
It's like a horror movie right there in his smart speaker. Well, that static sound can only mean that, sadly, folks, it's time for us to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Jen for joining us for this week's show.
Thank you.
Now, Jen, you've been here before quite a bit. You're a very welcome and regular guest, so you're aware of our usual habit, and now is the time for you to answer 3 quickfire questions. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media online? And because you've answered this question twice already, who's the second best children's cartoons character of all time?
See, now I'm going to go to the cartoon character first because I'm going to have to think about this. And I'm actually going to say Inspector Gadget because, I mean, obviously Penny was superior in every way. Brain, I don't know, he had his moments, but I'm going to go Inspector Gadget for number 2. In terms of where you can find my work, it's all over News Corp mastheads like the Courier Mail and the Daily Telegraph, and just all over the shop. You Google me. And I live on Twitter under the name Jen Dudley, and you can probably find me there.
Well, as Vertical Hold's resident evil Grand Vizier, obviously I've got to back Mad Cat in this argument. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, on the web at verticalhold.com.au, or on the Vertical Hold Facebook page, although we're still waiting to cut a news deal with Facebook. Call us!
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in again. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and help spread the good word. Leave a review because it really does help us find new listeners so we can get out there and be bigger and better in 2021. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. So speaking of magnanimous, how do you say that?
Magnanimous?
Magnanimous. Yeah.
Speaking of magnanimous rulers, this week we're joined by a longtime friend of the show and